In this video, I'm going to show you how ions form and how you can figure it out. Alright, so before we can actually get into ions, I need to talk to you about why it actually happens in the first place. Now, the reason why an atom wants to become an ion is that it just wants to be stable. And there's a rule that we throw out there called the octet rule. Octet is an 8. They're saying that for atoms to be stable, they want 8 electrons in their outer shell. And another way to say outer shell is valence electron. Nope, I meant valence shell. So in order to do that, some atoms have the option to either gain some electrons or lose some electrons in the valence shell, so they have 8. And so when they lose and they gain electrons, what happens is there's an imbalance between the protons in the nucleus and the electrons altogether. And because of this, they become charged. And we call these charged atoms ions. So every time you hear the word ion, think charged atom. And as I mentioned, it's because of the imbalance of the number of protons and electrons when it becomes charged. Let's talk about anions. They're formed when atoms gain at least one or more electrons. These electrons actually join the atom in the valence shell, so the outermost shell that we're talking about. For every electron that's gained, the atom or the ion itself gains a -1 charge, which sounds really weird because you're saying you're gaining, but you're gaining a negative charge, so you actually get more negative. Be careful. So if you gain 1 electron, you become a -1 charge. If you gain 2 electrons, you become a -2 charge. In other words, there are more electrons, or we should say more here, electrons than protons. So let's have a look at the atom fluorine. Fluorine in its natural state has 2, 4, 6. You notice that there's 7. Now fluorine has 2 options. Either it can lose all of the 7 electrons, or it can gain a single electron. Now atoms are like us. They're lazy. They want to do things that don't take as much energy so that they become stable. So the easiest thing here to do is to actually gain an electron. Fluorine actually has 9 protons in its nucleus. So if you count the number of protons and electrons, so fluorine here as an example, you've got 9 protons, which are all positively charged, and then you've got 10 electrons that are negatively charged. Now, overall, you have 1 more electron than you do have protons. Therefore, fluorine actually will then have a charge of fluorine minus. Now, because it's -1, we don't write the 1, we just say minus. So because fluorine has gained the electron in its valence shell, it's now become a negative ion called an anion. What's the opposite of an anion? It's a cation. Cations are formed when you actually lose 1 or more electron. You're going to lose electrons, 1 or more electron. Again, I have to stress that these are actually lost from the valence shell, so for the outermost shell. So for every electron that's lost, you get an additional +1 charge. You're actually becoming more positive. If you lose 1 electron, you become a +1 charge. If you lose 2 electrons, you become a +2 charge, and so on and so forth. So in other words, there are actually more protons than electrons in this atom. Okay, that's why it's charged, and that's why it's positively charged. So let's have a look at sodium. In my outer shell, my valence shell, I've got 1 electron. Now, in order to satisfy that octet rule, there's 2 options. Either sodium gains 7 electrons or it loses 1. And it's much easier to lose this 1 electron than it is to gain 7. As a result, just think that this outer shell is now no longer there. So now the outer shell becomes this shell here. And as you can see, 2, 4, 6, 8. Satisfies the octet rule, it's nice and happy. Sodium actually has 11 protons, but now it has 10 electrons. So you can see the imbalance of protons that are positively charged and electrons that are negatively charged. So sodium here actually becomes a +1 charge. To summarize, how do we actually figure out the type of ion? Really, kind of like 3 main steps. Figure out the number of valence electrons that are in the atom. So count the number of electrons in the outer shell. And then think, does it need to gain or lose electrons? And if so, how many? And once you've done that, then you can define the type of ion that you've got. Either it's a positive ion or a negative ion. And then do the charge. So let's do one last example together before I let you go. Valence shell here, oxygen atom, 2, 4, 5, 6. 6. Now we want to get 8. And so the easiest thing to do here is to gain 2 electrons. You can see 1 here, 1 here with the pairs. What does that mean? Now oxygen has 8 protons and now it has 10 electrons. See the imbalance between protons and electrons. There's 2 more electrons than there are protons. So what you'll notice here is oxygen actually has a charge of -2. And that, my friends, is it for today. I hope that was useful. And if it was, check back to the channel to see other videos that could be helpful as well. Subscribe, tell your friends about it, all those things. And remember, no matter what anybody says, yeah, you can.